Suicide. Introduction. Dear students, I would like to start this topic with a simple questions. What are the two strong emotions experienced by human beings? Just think. Yes, they are pleasure and pain. People try to find means to maintain their pleasure and get rid of their pain. Isn't that true? So how do people try to put an end to pain? Of course, the first thought that comes to some of us, at least, is suicide. Is committing suicide a legal action? As a matter of fact, committing suicide is a legal offense. There is also a law to punish the act. Now, putting it in a nutshell, we see and hear every day newspaper and news channels bringing out alarming statistics of people attempting suicide and ending their lives. In truth, it is a sociological problem taken alike by a layman or an educated housemaker or office goer, male or female, old or young. Language, caste or creed finds no exception here. Reports say that many suicide attempts spring up every minute everywhere, and about 90,000 teens commit suicide around the world. The rich youth who are unable to adjust to the reality of life also make these hasty decisions. We find no exception in the thinking of any human in general, and therefore the suicide rate is still going up the scale. Mental balance is very important to prevent taking such actions as suicide. Indians pay very little attention to mental health. The anxious mind, failure, disappointment, and similar states of mind lead to committing suicide. Another reason for the upgoing rate of these cases is the easy way into guns, alcohol, and manipulation of internet social media. The study of society explains the causes of increased suicidal rate by psychological justification. Suicide is a result of an individual's level of mixing in the society and the amount of parameters on the individual's behavior. Hence, the reasons for suicide vary from individual to individual. Let us view it through the eyes of individuals seeking opinions of psychiatric experts. Characterization of suicide. Let us now discuss and understand how suicide is different from murder and what are the motives behind each suicidal attempt. Suicide is an act of intentionally killing of oneself. Murder is an act of killing another person. However, both are acts of crime. Yes, murder is done on account of selfish reasons and for benefits. But suicide is usually attempted or committed when a person gets into depression or loses mental balance or becomes subject to failure and falls victim to circumstances or fears to face criticism. Political or religious pressure too may sometimes lead to committing suicide. Both Emrc and Durkheim call it a conscious action of the person who wishes to end his or her life. They term it so for the doers do understand the result of their action very clearly. If it is said that the doers are ignorant of the end result, it is then the problem of mental ill health. Here, suicide has nothing to do with social framework. Several years ago, Roy Baumeister, the famous psychologist, elucidated the cases of suicide thus. A person does not arrive at the idea of committing suicide just like that. He or she is directed to that decision due to a series of unpleasant situations. The study of psychology relates how attempters of suicide move into that action. Durkheim says, the term suicide is applied to all cases of death resulting directly or indirectly from a positive or negative act of the victim himself, which he knows will produce this result. Reference, Suicide, 1897. Circumstances causing the thought of suicide. Talk about a person who is led to commit suicide due to prior unpleasant situations. It can be said that the disturbed mind experiences 6 different stages. These stages can be viewed as follows. 1. Severe disappointment. 2. Self-blame. 3. Self-absorption. 4. Depression and anxiety. 5. Cognitive destruction. And 6. Embarrassment. Severe disappointment. Every individual possesses dreams and expectations. When these do not get materialized, he or she suffers from mental unrest. The disappointed mind, searching for a solution, therefore ends up with a plan to commit suicide because that seems to be the easiest to do. Self-blame. Self-blame is the outcome of people who think they are hopeless cases. They take it for granted that they are the sole reasons for their failures and difficulties and conclude that suicide puts an end to these. In other words, these people suffer from inferiority complex, and it is the most hazardous, leading to victims that commit suicide. Self-absorption. People set goals to achieve and sometimes will not be able to achieve it. They enter depression, brooding over their inabilities. Here, the individual battles against his or her own self and not with the family or society. And this kind of self-absorption leads them to take this extreme end of committing suicide. Depression and nervousness. Some human minds often recall the bitter occurrences of the past and the present. Disturbed minds turn weak and settle in depression. Old memories of unsuccessful relationship are also one of the root causes of depression. Baumeister claims this as negative effect. He believes that all disappointments promote only negative emotions which pave way to serious depression and anxiety. The worst thing is the comparison we make of ourselves with the others and the painful accident of not matching causes for depression and anxiety. The helplessness sows a seed for thoughts of committing suicide. Cognitive deconstruction. Some individuals think too much and try to find answers for many an unresolved question. This causes them to strain unnecessarily and places on them unwanted queries which, when they fail to find answers, leads them to a state of depression. An idle man's mind is the devil's workshop. Hence, it is better that the brain is always preoccupied with some meaningful thought and work. An individual staying far away from meaningful thought can easily move into the stage of suicide attempts. This becomes a very critical situation then. Disinhibition. Even though many incidents occur to the dissatisfaction of the mind and the heart, it is that last moment decision that makes one decide to go in for suicide. It is a final emotional hurdle that plays between the mind and suicide. Environment of suicide. Having seen the stages of suicide, now let us see the different types of suicide. Suicide can be classified based on the relationship between the individual and the society. Durkheim says suicides in the society is broadly classified into 4 types: anomic suicide, altruistic suicide, egoistic suicide, and fatalistic suicide. Anomic suicide. Suicide is committed when the decayed forces in the society humiliate some individual and keeps him or her aloof and wins, making him or her feel lost. This kind of suicide mostly happens when society does not legalize individuals sufficiently. Social change may cause a lot of uncertainty and makes guidelines of the society foggy. Altruistic suicide. Traditional or political or regional practices may also force upon people altruistic suicide. The entire community gives up its life out of a responsibility. The example of a Hindu wife who kills herself at the funeral of her husband is one of the examples. Egoistic suicide. Inadequate adaptation leads to egoistic suicide. Fatalistic suicide. The occurrence of fatalistic suicide is comparatively less in our society. Too much of restriction in the family or society leads one to this direction. The 2 social factors, namely moral regulation and social integration of an individual, attributes to the above said types of suicide. Most interesting is that the French sociologist and famous writer Emrc Durkheim writes of different aspects of suicide in his book Suicide in 1997. He brings out the fact that among Protestants and Catholics, Catholics exercise stronger social control and display lower suicidal rates. Here, he finds Catholic society has normal levels of integration, while Protestant society has very, very low levels. However, there are at least two interpretations that go with this information. First, Durkheim collected most of his statistics from earlier researchers, especially from Adolf Warner and Henry Morselli, who were very careful in taking a broad view of their own data. Second, the later researchers observed that Protestant Catholic differences in suicide to be limited in connection with the German-speaking Europe, and thus may have always been the unauthentic indication of other aspects. In spite of its limitations, it is true that Durkheim's information on suicide has attracted supporters of control theory and has won the mention as a traditional sociological study. The work of Durkheim brings out another fact too. Between men and women who commit suicide, the rate of suicide is higher among men than women. Married women who fail to produce children top the list of women committing suicide. What is alarming is that the suicide rate of unmarried people top the list of suicidal rates. Although it is hard to believe, it is true that Protestants do exhibit higher rates of suicide than Catholics and Jews. Soldiers display even higher rates of suicides than civilians. Literacy, harmony, and warfare played a vital role in influencing people to commit suicide. Statistical data of suicide rates in India. One suicide is committed every 40 seconds according to the data of World Health Organization. Mumbai statistics shows 3 deaths every week by way of suicide. The southern states of India, that is Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh and Kerala, together comprise 22% of the Indian population. And it is recorded that 42% of suicide deaths is committed by men, while only 40% of suicide cases among women, as per the record of 2010 released in 2012 by TOI. Maharashtra and West Bengal together account for an additional 15% of suicidal deaths. It is guessed from these statistics that the fatality of suicide throughout the world could even rise to 1.5 million by 2020. Suicide is preventable and avoidable. World Health Organization says that it is nothing but a mental health issue prevailing among people throughout the world. A report published on March 26th by the psychiatrists of the Royal College demands for equal levels of treatment for both mental and physical health setback. This study provides information of 24% of people suffering from mental disorders, 28% of people suffering from post-traumatic stress-related disorder, and 91% of people suffering from high blood pressure after having received treatment. They share the view that mental health disorder diminishes life expectancy by an average of 15 to 20 years. NHS 2009-2010 presents the upscale death report of 10.5% caused due to mental and behavioral disorder. Interpersonal violence such as marital cruelty, economic hitches, and the others that drive women to commit suicide, as per the fact proclaimed to the UK press by Vikram Patel, who Wellcome Trust Senior Research Fellow in Clinical Science and co-author in Lancet. In India, the tendency of committing suicide arises among the students due to poor score or below anticipated score in the exam for intelligence of an individual. The IQ of an individual here is measured in terms of his scores in the examinations. Children are fed with the thought of high scores as being the parameter and measure for their success right from their childhood. Thus, children fail to identify their own strengths and lose mental balance on the anxiety of performing well in exams and then go into the extent of committing suicide. Mental stress leads to depression, and depression takes them to unimaginable ends. Views of Durkheim and Zilberg. Durkheim declares that it is not age or sex or color or race or even urban and rural that directs one to suicide, but rather a combination of social environment such as family, political, economic society, and religious groups that take a toll on people's mental health and lead them to huge tragedies. The connection among all these affects individuals to incline towards suicide. He feels that every society has collective reasons for suicide. The book To Be or Not to Be by Louis Dublin presents clarification for the cause of suicide in depth. It clearly says that the mental hygiene and psychiatry is the major causes for suicide. Statistical reports of Gregory Zilberg on suicide proclaim that the compiling of today deserves little because it lacks credibility. Scientific students state that suicide cases cannot be evaluated on the basis of statistical data that is available because many suicidal case reports defy clarity. Accidents cannot be considered as suicide. Some suicide cases and some attempted cases are hidden by family members for various reasons. Hence, these do not come into the statistical records. The narrow escapers of suicide attempt or victims of aftermath too do not get into these records. Study on psychoanalysis made by Zilberg ensures that psychiatry is the driving force of suicide. Victims of depression, psychosis, compulsive neurosis, and schizophrenia are very prone to suicides. His study strongly announces that not a single clinical individual recognized for psychotherapy is protected from the thought of committing suicide. Suicide is a reaction of developmental nature in almost all mentally sick people of all types and also in many a normal person. It is believed that there might be plenty of reasons for committing suicide besides just depression. It could also be listed as chronic anxiety, previous suicidal attempts, genetic history of suicide, or psychiatric conditions in a family, child abuse, sexual abuse, stressful events in relationships like breaking up of any relationship, dropping out from school, drug and alcohol abuse, eating disorders, being forced to take certain medications, including antidepressants, atomoxetine, a medication for ADHD, isotretinoin, used to treat teens with severe nodulocystic acne, anti-seizure drugs such as Tegretol, valproate, lamotrigine, etc. The thought of committing suicide, threatening to hurt himself, searching to get a way to hurt himself, writing about dying, and increased abuse of alcohol, drugs, feeling hopelessness, purposelessness of living, feeling trapped, withdrawal from connections and usual activities, dramatic mood change, anxiety symptoms, uncontrolled anger, wanting revenge against someone, impulsiveness and recklessness as some of the behavioral symptoms of mental unhealthiness leading to suicide, according to American Association of Suicidology. The thought of committing suicide is provoked due to the issues caused by age, sex, income groups, education levels, marital status, peace and war, and these issues are addressed below. Suicide and age. As people grow old, some suffer from emotional and physical pains. The failure in most of their endeavors at every stage of their life causes frustration and depression. They count themselves as waste. Recalling their life as futile adds to their misery. The feeling of old age and the thought of anticipating death finds ease and comfort in committing suicide. Suicide and sex. Men outwit women in this aspect. It may be because of the emotional difference in men and women and their interrelationship. The social status of men too could be one of the reasons. Suicide and income groups. People born in higher income group in the society are taken care of and protected well from the infancy stage itself. Hence, sudden springing up of some dissatisfaction or pain leads them to commit suicide. The number of such cases is also found to be very high. Economical instability and helplessness for a better life among the lower income group in the society also forces one to move towards this phenomena. Educational levels. Sometimes, a layman proves to be more intelligent than an educated man. Expectations of learned are always high. If they happen to come across even a small fall or mishap, they make a hasty decision which further leads to commit suicide. They become depressed very soon. Suicide and war. Military people are most of the time away from their near and dear ones and their kith and kin and their hometown. Work environment for them is very stressful and hostile. They are prone to fall victim to depression and frustration. Therefore, the psychiatric problem aggravating the thought of suicide is more among these people. Leo Sher of New York, USA wrote a book named War and Suicide. He explains the details of the relationship between suicide and war, suicide and marital status. Emotions play a vital role in the divorced and undivorced men and women. Divorced men suffer the feeling of inability to maintain an amicable relationship. As a result, they resort to suicide. Divorced women inclined to commit suicide are lesser than the divorced men inclined to the same. Status of women is not that high compared to the women in other developed countries. Economic dependency and social status scare women of India from breaking up marriages. Life is precious. It is meant to live and not destroy. Life may not be a bed of roses, but it is definitely not only a bed of thorns. Man is a social animal. He cannot live in solitude. Therefore, he seeks help and gives help. There is a lot for all the five senses: see, smell, adore, hear, and relish. Life is meant to live. Motivate yourself to live. Society does not pay heed to your call. Let me quote Durkheim's own words in this context from the preface to Le Suicide. There is nothing necessarily discouraging in the incompleteness of the results thus far obtained. They should arouse new efforts, not surrender. This makes possible some continuity in a scientific labor, continuity upon which progress depends. From Suicide, 1897. Conclusion. Globalization and urbanization in India forces many changes in the culture of the society. Domestic violence, unemployment, educational problem, economic conditions, poverty, divorce, premarital love, extramarital relationships, illegal pregnancy, and so on supplement the causes for suicide. Nuclear family, working parents, high-paying insecure jobs, work stress, dreams to soar high, obviously unease the life of people and naturally tends them towards miserable and unbelievable ends such as suicide. A rustic too does not escape this plight. Farmers too resort to committing suicide. The Indian society suffers to the core. Positive thoughts of life need to be promoted. Helpless people have to be educated. A happy man develops a happy family. A happy family upholds a happy society. A happy society develops a healthy nation. A healthy nation contributes to a harmonious world. It is therefore the responsibility and duty of every human being, including you and me, being born upon this divine earth. So let each one of us be a happy individual and contribute towards a happy society and create a harmonious world.